Today we're going to be talking about creating your own creatures, how to make them realistic and interesting. Alright, now jumping right in. The next in-person meeting will be on April 27th from 8 to 9 p.m. I hope to see you all there. I would really love to hear your stories, to help you edit them, to go over them as a group. I would love to get to know you all. If you can't come in person, please feel free to email me, and I would also be happy to help you with whatever you need. Alright, so these are just some basics that we can talk about, but ultimately it's really important to think about all sorts of things when you're creating your own creatures, especially if you want them to be realistic. And I know you're saying, well, it's a fantasy world, so they don't necessarily have to be realistic. The more realistic you can make your fantasy world, the more interesting it will be to your readers, because it will feel real and be more immersive as a result. Alright, so when creating your own creatures, first make sure that they're unique. Why are they unique? How are they unique? Make sure that it's not just a dog that's blue for no reason. It has to have a purpose or a meaning behind it. And by meaning, I don't mean metaphorical. I mean like the dog is blue because the grass is blue, therefore it would blend in better. That kind of thing. First up, we have forest creatures. Speaking of dogs and wolves and things, if it's colder, you need to make sure that they either have fur or some sort of blubber, or both, to keep them nice and warm. Think of a bear. Or if you're thinking of the things a little bit further up north, think of seals. Seals on the coast tend to have a lot more blubber. If it's warmer, you might want them to be a reptile, because the cold-bloodedness will help keep them cool, but also not freeze to death because they're in that hotter climate. You can also have them be mostly aquatic, like a hippo, where that's how they cool off, is by staying in the water. You can also have limited amounts of fur, like cheetahs. That's very thin, light, wispy fur, or barely any on them. Same thing with lions. It's very light, almost no fur at all, just to make sure that they don't overheat. And yes, I know we're talking about the mane doesn't necessarily count. I'm talking more about their whole fur rather than just the mane. You also need to take into consideration, are they a carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore? Now, this might seem kind of like a silly detail, but it is important, because it will, if the main character, person, who is in charge of this animal doesn't know how to take care of it, that will be bad. But also, even if they do know how to take care of it, you want to make sure you're consistent in how they take care of it, and you're not just saying whatever willy-nilly. Also, if they have sharp teeth, they are always going to be some form of a carnivore, whether it be carnivore or omnivore. And remember, like with omnivores and people, you have the sharper teeth in the front and the molars in the back. So if they're an omnivore or carnivore, they're going to have sharp pointy teeth. If they have sharp pointy teeth and they only ever eat leaves, you gotta explain why. And there are so few cases in which that really works, that you honestly need to just probably not go with sharp teeth if you're going to do an herbivore. Which sounds silly, but again, the more realistic you can make it, the more relatable your world will be. You also got to keep in mind water creatures. How do they move? Do they have tentacles? Do they have flippers? Do they have gills? If they live in the depths, are they going to have bioluminescence? If not, then how do they see? If they live up near the top, are they going to have some photosynthesis qualities? Some sea slugs actually live off photosynthesis. You also need to take into account, for any kind of creature, what they eat, but also, are they an apex predator? Do they eat other predators and creatures, or are they the tiny squishy little goldfish and eat that everything else pretty much eats it instead of the other way around? That's going to help you kind of differentiate what they look like. For example, piranha are not an apex predator. They are small, therefore other things can eat them. Yes, they have tiny sharp teeth, great, but they aren't going to be an apex predator. In general, most of the time, apex predators are the larger predators or the smarter predators. So if you do have a smaller creature that is the apex predator, you gotta explain what makes them so dang smart that despite their size, they are so dang scary. And even then, you gotta explain how smart they are. For example, with humans, we're smart enough that we not only are apex predators, but we also cause great problems to society, is the way that the creature is doing things causing problems. It seems smart, but in reality it's only beneficial to them. Another thing to keep in mind, if they are not an apex predator, and even if they are, apex predators have other apex predators, which sounds absolutely baffling and scary, but most of the time, even if you're an apex predator, something can try to kill you or fight you, right? So as a result, how do they protect themselves? Do they have poison? Do they have a hard shell? Do they have quills? Do they have bright colors to ward creatures off? Do they use camouflage? Now, camouflage can also be an interesting thing because of the fact that there are things like the viceroy butterfly, I believe that's correct, that mimics the monarch butterfly. And if you look at them side by side, you can tell the difference, but a bird can't. And so as a result, a bird would rather give up the idea of having a tasty butterfly meal because it is afraid for the fact that monarchs are poisonous and will give them an upset stomach, and viceroys are actually quite delicious. This is an evolutionary thing that viceroy butterflies have used in order to become less desirable and therefore be more protected. So they're not necessarily camouflaging with their environment, they're camouflaging into another species. So that's something to take into consideration too. And if they camouflage, how does that work? You might want to look into various animals' types of camouflage. And yes, you can have some weird animals, obviously, like the platypus, but even if you look at the platypus, everything that is in the platypus's makeup makes sense. The bill is so they can dive deep down. They lay eggs because of, I can't remember. I think it's because of the fact that they're aquatic, and so as a result, it's safer for them to lay eggs in the sand, kind of like sea turtles do. They also have the little webbed flippers, but then they also have the fur. However, the fur can go pockets underwater, so that way it keeps them nice and warm, and they can dry off faster. There are all sorts of different things that make the platypus work. So yes, it looks like a crazy abomination when you look at it from a non-evolutionary standpoint, but actually from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense. In some ways, you can create more compelling creatures when they are evolutionary based instead of just out of your own mind. Because of the fact that then, when your readers ask, hey, like, why is it blue? You can say, oh, well, it's because, and you can tell them all this cool lore that they don't know about. Or you can have one of your characters do it if one of them's particularly interested in animal, and then the other one's like, that's weird. And the other person can be like, well, excuse you, did you know? And that can be really fun for your readers too, to learn more about your world and your culture as you go. Especially if they're a pet or companion, you want to make sure they're interesting and intriguing, not just a blue dog or a cat with curled whiskers or a turtle but its shell is squishy. That doesn't even make sense. So as far as that goes, make sure that it makes sense and that it isn't just a gimmick off of something else. It's got to be unique, distinctly unique in its own way. Yes, you can use them as examples and say they're dog-like, but that only gives us a basis. Then show us why yours is cool and not a dog. Alright, moving right along. Another thing you're going to need to take into account, even if the readers never see this, is how do they reproduce? Do they have multiple mates? Do they mate for life? Do they have eggs or live birth? This is all going to affect how they care for the animal. Again, it's more likely that if they lay eggs, that they're going to need to take care of those eggs somehow, or do they eat the eggs? If they mate for life, then do they just not, if they're spayed or neutered or things like that in your universe, or do they still find companionship? If they have multiple mates, explain, like, is there extra diversity as a result of that amongst their species? Those can all actually really greatly affect how your species works. You can also go with the whole asexual reproduction method. There actually are lizards that are born, lizards and snails that are born to asexually reproduce, and they have both sets, so they can just fertilize their own eggs and have their own children. And how does that work with the asexual reproduction? Is it causing damage to the species because there isn't as much diversity, or is there somehow something that's working because of mutations? How does that affect the animal kingdom in your universe? Alright, next, top 3 things that you need to be taking into account. just to summarize, what is necessary for them to live? You need to make sure you include that in your animal design. Is it that they need camouflage? Is it that they need the sharp teeth? What makes them work? Do they need a long neck to eat from trees like giraffes and bronchiosaurus? Or do they live in the dark, in which case how do they see? Do they use echolocation like bats? Do they have bioluminescence like some critters down in the bottom of the ocean? Do they have better vision at night and they basically can't see during the day? Are they primarily awake during twilight or primarily awake during the day? Are they nocturnal creatures? This is going to affect how your universe works and how the animal interacts with your character. If they're a nocturnal creature, they're going to be bugging them and poking them and making all sorts of noise in the night. Whereas if they are a daytime creature, then they will completely be passed out during the night most of the time. Or like cats. Cats are actually dawn and dusk creatures. Can't remember what the term is, but they are primarily best awake at dawn and dusk. That's part of the reason why they wake you up at 3 a.m. is because that's naturally when they're supposed to be awake. And that does cause different problems with living with them as a pet. As a result, you need to deal with that and show the character dealing with that. However, again, only do what is necessary for your story. I would say this is all important to know if you're going to create a creature, and especially if you're creating your own world. But don't go too crazy. Just make sure that you know enough to get along. And then if you want to do more research later, absolutely, I would encourage you. The more research you can do, the more in depth you can make it, the more excited your readers will be to learn more of that lore and to learn more about them. And especially with the necessity. If it is necessary that you do know that they fly, then know how they fly. Are they a feathered creature? Are they more like a dragon? If so, how does that work? Are they more like a bumblebee? Bumblebees actually, that myth was totally wrong where they said bumblebees fly but scientists don't know. Well, yeah, that used to be true, but scientists actually figured out how they fly. You could use that method. You could also do hummingbirds where they can fly forward, backwards, diagonal, almost any direction. It's fascinating. Alright, so to recap, make sure you have what is necessary, whether it's protection, carnivore, herbivore, omnivore, whether it's colder, warmer, water creature, land creature. You gotta make sure that whatever you're doing, it's gonna make sense and flow well with your universe. And if you have certain things, make sure you explain why it makes sense in the rest of the environment. And lastly, make sure your creatures are unique. If you're going to create a new creature, make sure you create a new creature. Start from scratch. Don't make it just a dog that's blue or a cat that has curly whiskers or a turtle with a soft shell. Make sure that it is uniquely yours. And even if it is canine-like or turtle-based or cat-like, make sure that you know fully that it is your own and that you've made it somehow even more unique and cool than the original. Alright, thank you so much for watching. I really would love to see you at the next in-person meeting from 8 to 9 p.m. At the American Fork Library. Once again, I will post a video here. However, the meeting will be in person on April 27th from 8 to 9 p.m. And I really would love to see all of you there. If I won't be seeing you there, please just send me an email. I would love to help edit your stuff and work on different things with you and talk with you about what you've been thinking about the videos and how best I could help you. Or if there's a lesson that you want, please comment down below, something that you'd like to request or something that you'd like to learn about. Thank you so much. Bye.